We are all peasants being manipulated by puppet masters, the man behind the curtain.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain!
Now that might appear to be a bit of a sweeping statement, but look at the facts. Ever since World War II, where a blackboard equation E equals mc squared was turned into an atomic bomb, physics gave the military the cutting edge. The enemy didn't know what hit them, literally. So without a doubt, we live in 2025 in an era where we don't know what will hit us. What novel physics has the military war machine actually got up its sleeve today? So, in the quest to discover whether Ashton Forbes' MH370 Zappy video is actually possible, I reached out to a leading military physicist and said, how could you make things disappear? This is what he said.
If you were going to attempt to develop technologies in this realm, you would start with a high-powered radar system and modify it. For instance, if you wanted to make a real, solid, holographic image, this is what you would use to project energy into the local information field to make that new piece of reality pop into existence. I feel that it is likely that this is what was being attempted at Montauk, and if you wanted to continue that line of experimental development, there would be no better place on Earth than Rendlesham Forest to do that. There would be the skills, expertise and equipment available all within a small geographical area. So maybe the effect wasn't as unexpected as I first thought. As an engineer, my thoughts would be to use such technology to make things appear. Food, clean water, Kim Wilde singing to Hendrix. But the military minds behind the clandestine development might have an interest beyond solid decoys. They might have wanted to use it to make things disappear too. It is a chilling thought.
That's very interesting, but is there evidence of making stuff disappear or using advanced physics to do things that you wouldn't expect? For you, I found two very interesting examples. The first one has turned my world upside down. The downing of Kosmos 954. I thought it was an accident where a nuclear Russian satellite crashed into the northern territories of Canada. It was no accident. It was deliberately deorbited. And secondly, during the Cold War was a Russian spy satellite deorbited and crashed deliberately into eastern England. I really hope you will find this report interesting. If this is the kind of film that you enjoy, please subscribe to this channel and press like. I was contacted by a viewer who's researching a UFO in Manitoba, Canada, a well-known Canadian sighting over a cesium mine, which is kind of interesting because cesium is naturally radioactive and is used in clocks and is very important. Is there a connection between yet another UFO or UAP over a nuclear site? I think that's fascinating. But what he did is put in his query, was there a connection between a UFO and radiological sites, into ChatGPT. If ChatGPT can pull all that together and make an interesting answer for you, a UFO researcher, I think it's worth using. So I typed in, was Cobra Mist anything to do with the Rendlesham Forest incident? And even more so, I typed in, has Britain ever deorbited a Russian... Hang on a minute, what did ChatGPT say? They said, yes, the UK and the USA have been involved in operations that have led to deorbiting of Soviet spy satellites. Oh, that's very interesting. Tell me more. The most notable incident occurred with the Kosmos 954 satellite, which was launched by the Soviet Union in 1997. Oh yeah, I remember Cosmos 954. That was the one that crashed into northern Canada and spread radioactive debris all over the Northern Territories. I thought it just malfunctioned. Apparently not. So this ChatGPT went on to tell me this. Search teams did not find re-entry debris at the predicted location until they recalculated where the location would be based. Listen to this really carefully. Where the location would be based, indicating a stratospheric warming event had been in progress during the re-entry. Hang on. What they're saying is that man-made ionospheric heating raised our atmosphere. I mean, indirectly, the heating heats our atmosphere. It's not the EM radiation from the ionospheric heater, HARP, I suspect, that brings the satellite down. But HARP heats our atmosphere, making a bubble of atmosphere raise. And when the LEO, low Earth orbit spy satellite, went through it, it went through denser air, slowing it down multiple times. Instead of landing all the way back at Kazakhstan, it landed in Northern Territories, Canada. How did it find that out? ChatGPT Smarty Pants. It said the stratospheric warming was documented by the US Army Meteorological Rocket Station at Poker Flat Research Range near Fairbanks, Alaska. Oh, it's all come out. Here's the rocket range. I guess they recalculated because of HARP heating up the atmosphere that the US had deorbited the satellite because they needed to find it because it had spewed uranium over the Northwest Territories. And guess it all came out. But I assumed that it had just malfunctioned and crashed. Apparently not. Also, some of the systems on board were disabled. The Russian satellite should have ejected the radiological material and put it into a higher orbit or have it separate so it would have burnt up. But that system also failed. Now that's very interesting, because that brings me back to what might have happened at Rendlesham Forest. While researching the strange Rendlesham Forest UFO incident, a lot of people have mentioned that possibly there was a mission to deorbit another spy satellite, this time into Suffolk, or maybe into the shallow waters of the North Sea. And how it apparently worked was using the same techniques as the Canadian satellite. This time using an ionospheric heater in Finland and Norway called IceCat that heated up the atmosphere for a Kosmos satellite, which they accurately deorbited, and apparently it landed somewhere in eastern Suffolk. Guys and girls, go out and ask ChatGPT for answers. You can find the stuff yourself, but it might take you weeks or years to do the research that ChatGPT actually can pull together for us UFO investigators pretty quickly, and then it leads to bigger stories that we can talk about. So today let's look again at whether Britain actually deorbited a satellite that crashed into eastern England. I think it's a good story. Lots of people think it's true. Here's a film written by a leading British aerospace engineer about how a Soviet satellite might have been deorbited into Suffolk.
The Zenit 6U, also known as Argon or 11F645, was a Soviet optical reconnaissance satellite of the Vostok-based Zenit family to replace the earlier Zenit 2M, Gektor, Zenit 4M, Rotor, Zenit 4MK, Hermes, and Zenit 4MKM, Gerakel series. Zenit 6U was used for both low-altitude, high-resolution missions and higher-altitude area surveillance missions. The satellites consisted of the Vostok-based service and re-entry modules and featured an additional maneuvering engine which was jettisoned before re-entry. The spherical re-entry module returned both the cameras and the film to Earth at the end of the mission. The lifetime of the battery-powered spacecraft was typically 12 to 14 days. Capturing a Zenit 6 satellite would have been a great boon for NATO forces at the time, as it would have given an accurate view of Soviet satellite capabilities. But how could you capture one without outraging the Soviets at a time of huge tensions? Here is how I think you might do it. You would use your most powerful space-tracking radar to deliver a massive energy pulse, powerful enough to stun the electronics inside the satellite. To the Soviets, this would just appear to be a system failure of the type that can happen at any time. Solar wind, component failure, space debris impact, all can do this and do. What radar would be powerful enough? The AN/FPS-49 at RAF Fylingdales certainly would. You would need to take one of the 3 dishes off its missile launch spotting duties to do so, though, and you would have to reprogram the pulse duration cycles of the klystrons feeding that dish. It had multiple klystrons that fed their outputs into combinational waveguides to feed the antennas. As a backup plan, or instead of one of NORAD's primary space radars, you might want to use the equally powerful FGAN system in Germany, known as TIRA, Tracking and Imaging Radar. This is a huge and very powerful space tracking radar that can operate within several wavebands. Its upper operating frequency is much higher than other comparable radars. At the low end of the terahertz band, upper end of the microwave band. This is so the wavelength is very short so that it can take radar images that are almost photograph-like, even several thousand miles away. You now have a very high-speed flying brick. How do you bring it down where you want it to land? You track it as accurately as you can whilst you slam on the air brakes in a controlled fashion every time it passes you in its orbit. This may sound like science fiction, but locally, raising sections of the atmosphere is exactly what atmospheric heaters are designed to do. They heat and raise the ionosphere very precisely using phased array radio transmitters of huge power. But HAARP was not online for another 13 years, I hear you say. Well, correct, but it didn't need to be. There was a pre-existing ionospheric heater with 1/4 of its power near Tromsø in northern Norway, known as EISCAT. This is a joint scientific and military system, which is now being upgraded further to EISCAT 3D. EISCAT is a phased array ionospheric heater in the Arctic Circle, where the electrojet is close to the Earth, the same electrojet that is the power source for the Earth energy system. Phased array antenna systems are active antennas which transmit their signals in a typically narrow beam, which is steered by the careful computerized timings of the radio signals reaching the antennas. The transmitted beam can be swept very quickly and accurately, far more so than with mechanically steered antennas. To be effective, the atmosphere would need to be lifted to meet the tracked satellite over many passes, probably over 2 or 3 days. Each slowing would fractionally alter its re-entry envelope until the satellite would be on a dedicated course to re-enter, hopefully somewhere near the area you want it to. This would be a very clever thing to do accurately. There would be a reasonably large area of uncertainty of its final trajectory, even with the most accurate of braking. You would need to track it to the ground and be ready to recover it quickly from land or sea. To recover from the sea, you would also prefer a shallow section of sea, such as the North Sea. What would you use to track the final part of the re-entry accurately? If this was the southeast coast of England, you would have a good choice of air sector radars. They are everywhere. There was the Master Radar Station, MSR, at RAF Neatishead, with similar range of equipment to RAF Bawdsey, most noticeably an FPS-6 height-finding radar, a Type 84 Linesman, and a Type 85 Blue Yeoman air defense radar. This would be fine for an object flying at the height of a normal aircraft, but what would be better would be a radar designed to track and guide a ground-launched missile to the edge of space and back down. 2 such radars were fitted at RAF Bawdsey in 1979. And not only was RAF Bawdsey the leading experimental radar research base in the UK, it is on the coast, only a few miles from RAF Woodbridge. Until the mid-1970s, RAF Bawdsey took over the MRS role from RAF Neatishead after a very serious fire there, When RAF Neatishead was rebuilt and back online, RAF Bawdsey was converted into a Bloodhound missile site. The Bloodhound Mk2 missiles installed there are guided by a powerful Type 87 Scorpion constant wave radar system. Most radars send out pulses, but a constant wave radar sends out a beam. If the two radar types were light sources instead of radio sources, then the pulsed systems would be like a flash gun for a camera. They would make an enormously bright flash many times a second, but in between flashes, there would be times of no light, so the average light output power would be much less than the peak's flash intensity. A CW, constant wave radar, would be like a searchlight. When it is in operation, it is on all the time. So, in operation, a pulsed radar would blind you, but a CW radar would cook you. In real terms, we are familiar with a domestic microwave oven, or radar range. They are typically magnetron devices of around 750 watts. A Type 87 radar, if it operated at the same frequency as a microwave oven, would be the equivalent of 800 microwave ovens, which instead of transmitting the energy into a metal box a foot or so away, transmitted it in a searchlight-type beam for over 300 miles. This would be powerful enough to cause plasma effects if focused at a relatively short range. It would also be ideal for feeding and steering targeting plasmas for phase conjugate directed energy weapons, such as in the Star Wars weapons program, as well as a remote power charging system for unmanned UAV aircraft. It was anticipated that the Soviets would try to retrieve or destroy the Zenit satellite. This can be seen by positioning HMS Norfolk near the coast to give a radius of detection protection from Soviet submarines and surface craft. A Russian frogman that was captured in the local woodland would suggest that this was only partially effective. Meanwhile, a Soviet aircraft given the codename Bear G would be patrolling for up to 20 hours at a time in international waters off the coast. It may even have had a Bear D Elint companion for RT intercept and coordination. The job of the Bear G would be to use its long-range radar-guided anti-ship missiles to destroy the Zenith if it was seen to be on a splashdown descent off the coast. There are no reports of explosions at sea for the RFI incident that I know of, so this implies that the Zenit came down on land. Hence, a frogman was sent ashore. The 67th would have carried the Zenit away very quickly. They are experts at such recoveries. Charlie Wicker was the 67th ARS commander and was an expert in recovering downed satellites. Also note, witnesses reported seeing something being transported via helicopter, damaging the runway lights.
And on a strange personal note, if that satellite deorbiting really happened in the UK, it was returned to the Soviet Union at Makra-Hanish, where my father was in charge of everything imported and exported by NATO. But he never mentioned it. British engineer Winston Keach, who wrote that report on the satellite deorbiting, also knows about strange exotic weapons. I wonder what he would say about what might have happened to MH370. Listen to how Winston Keach describes directed energy weapons and their connection to Nikola Tesla.
The last part relevant to the RFI is quantum tunneling. As we have seen, matter and energy can be largely interchangeable depending on when you are viewing them. As most people are familiar with matters as barriers, I will stick to that perspective. And linear time, people are more comfortable with that too. When a barrier at the quantum level experiences a wave striking it, the wave can either be absorbed or reflected. At a quantum level, there is a probability curve that can do a third thing. It can partly pass through the barrier. The higher the energy of the wave or particle and the thinner the barrier, the more passes through. This is called quantum tunneling. Our reality is actually multiplexed between many others. These are time, frequency, and phase division multiplexed so that they don't normally interact in a meaningful way. Basically, the fundamental parameters of the reality waves are used to squash as many independent reality signals into one reality beam as possible. The same techniques are used in telecommunications. It is how you send millions of data channels down an optic fiber without them interfering with each other. As coincidence would have it, fiber optic communications were developed and largely invented at BT Martlesham Heath, just a few miles from both RAF Bawdsey and RAF Woodbridge. It would seem that for the large-scale effects to apply reality physics engineering, you need radio and especially radar engineers and equipment. You need high-power, high-voltage DC pulses to displace the T2 phase. DC because we're in a modular math section of reality. But you need advanced telecommunications engineers to access the finer, wider detail because they are experts at multiplex systems and wave phase dispersion. To make matters more complex, the holographic sheet is also rolled up into a tube, so trans-dimensional distances to the periodic reappearances of parts of our linear timeline may be only micro-fine distances away if you could travel sideways trans-dimensionally. A lot of things do this, and I strongly suspect that the torsion field effect of the entrained ground energy during the RFI incident is what allowed something from a future point on a potential timeline to pop through. Resonant coupling of energy matter from both sides of the barrier until the entire energy matter from the somewhere else tunneled through the natural energetic barrier between it and us. It may even have been engineered to do that and would effectively have been a portable tunnel to other reality frames, a bit like the extending corridor from an airport to an airplane. Similarly, the corridor does not define the size of the airport it connects to, so a relatively small corridor could lead to a very large airport, except that in this case, the length of the tunnel might only be nanometers. So from the plane, you only see a corridor, but as soon as you step into it, you only see the airport. Now, to complete the context for Tesla's teleforce, people only see this as an early particle beam weapon, analogous to a railgun, which is still pretty good going for 100 years ago. Tesla was a precise man, and one primarily interested in longitudinal EM waves. These are more like sound waves and have some very distinct properties from transverse EM waves. They are still just waves, though, not magic. Tesla knew that these were shock waves rippling through the fabric of local space. He also saw that they passed straight through matter, so he will have realized that they are phase-shifted during propagation and are only experienced as a localized self-collimated point of force, which has an energy equivalent to a particle and will not be a particle once more until it is phase-shifted back to matter. That is why he named it teleforce. If you are going to easily engineer reality physics, this is a ready-made source of engineerable, higher-order phase-shifted energy. The processes he used to generate teleforce are directly comparable to processes using klystron systems to generate high-power radar. If you were going to attempt to develop technologies in this realm, you would start with a high-powered radar system and modify it. For instance, if you wanted to make a real, solid, holographic image, this is what you would use to project energy into the local information field to make that new piece of reality pop into existence. I feel that it is likely that this is what was being attempted at Montauk, and if you wanted to continue that line of experimental development, there would be no better place on Earth than Rendlesham Forest to do that. There would be the skills, expertise and equipment available all within a small geographical area. So maybe the effect wasn't as unexpected as I first thought. As an engineer, my thoughts would be to use such technology to make things appear. Food, clean water, Kim Wilde singing to Hendrix. But the military minds behind the clandestine development might have an interest beyond solid decoys. They might have wanted to use it to make things disappear too. It is a chilling thought.
Oh, that was fascinating stuff from a very connected military engineer who might have just described for you, right here, right now, the type of technology that might have been used to make MH370 disappear. the truth is out there.